Thank you very much indeed. Welcome everyone. I'm Darren Sanders. I'm a Liberal Democrat councillor for Baffins, North Milton and South Copner, and I'm also the Cabinet Member for Housing and Preventing Homelessness. Before we begin, a few pieces of shop, otherwise known as the safety information. If the continuous fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the room and public gallery by the stairwells. Do not attempt to use the lifts. Please assemble by Queen Victoria's statue in Guildhall Square. In order to comply with the fire marshal regulations of the Guildhall Trust, whose building we are in today, anyone who signed in at the Guildhall reception desk should sign out when leaving the building at the end of today's meeting. There may be a slight delay as people are buying tickets for something here right now. If you do. May I draw everyone's attention to the fact that this meeting is being live streamed. Everyone speaking via a microphone will be on camera, including those making deputations. So please put your best side forward. Members of the press and public are also permitted to record the meeting on the understanding that it neither disrupts the meeting nor records those stating explicitly that they do not wish to be recorded. Please, can everyone use the microphones and remember to switch them off when they have finished. The only exception is me. Introductions can then be made around the table, so the script says, which is exactly what I'm going to do. So I shall start on my left.
Anna Martin, Democratic Services.
Young George.
Councillor George, manager of the Paulsgrove Ward.
Right. Young Cal.
Cal Corkery, councillor for Charles Dickens Ward and Labour spokesperson for housing.
Thanks, Cal. Now the middle row. I'll go this way.
Maria Cole, Residents Consortium.
Sue Gordon, Residents Consortium.
Felicity Goodyear, Residents Consortium. I'm also a tenant.
James Hill, Director of Housing, Neighbourhood and Building Services.
Steve Groves, Head of Building Maintenance.
Wayne Layton, Finance Manager.
Hello, you two at the back. You thought you could escape.
Sally Scattergood, Assistant Director of Housing.
And Nicola Clanahan, Head of Housing Community Services.
Thank you very much. You did all so much better than the politicians do, so thank you very much. That's very kind of you. So we've got various items here. We have for people who are new, we have a chance where people can make deputations. There aren't any today. We have an apology for absence because our Conservative colleague, Councillor Daniel Weems, has come down with some lurgy. So we wish him well. Good evening. We'll deal with you later. I was coming to you in a second because I was going to come to the declarations of interest in a second, young Cal. Wasn't it? Oh, okay, fine. You've got an apology, haven't you? No, come on then. What is it?
Just to apologise, we may have to leave early, about 10:50 if we're still going, madam.
If we're still going at 10:50, then I suspect we may have failed. I have a surgery at 11 o'clock, so I suspect we may be out at the same time, which is fine. But thank you for mentioning that, Cal. Again, do any members have anything interesting to declare in this context? Yes, Cal.
Personal interest in that I'm a council tenant.
That's absolutely fine. Thank you for doing that. So we've got two items on the agenda for today's thing. For newbies, although this is a decision-making meeting, there are some times whereby things that are important to be put into the public and discussed in the public can come forwards, and so these two things have come forwards today. How the meeting normally works is that ultimately I take the decisions. So this is technically my meeting, but the way I work is to try and work through consensus where possible. So what will happen is that the relevant officer will give a presentation, then Cal and George will be able to make comments, and my job is to sum up, and I will occasionally heckle from the back and ask questions as well. Our Residents Consortium colleagues, thank you very much for coming. You will always go first because you're important on that, and then we'll see where we get to. So, the special lettings plan. Jo, hello.
Hello, thank you, Councillor Sanders. This report looks to provide information on the special lettings plan which was used to allocate new council housing at Doyle Avenue. For background, the Director of Housing, Neighbourhoods and Buildings approved in March the implementation of a special lettings plan for the allocation of general needs properties at Doyle Avenue. the letting plan was prepared to assist in the allocation and letting of properties by creating a balanced and sustainable community whilst directly responding to existing housing pressures. By using the special lettings plan, we also wanted to understand if the new development could be used as a catalyst for movement within social housing stock, supporting our existing tenants to be rehoused in accommodation suitable for their needs, and to understand the impact of this action on homeless families. Excuse me. Sorry about that. All moves and subsequent resolutions of housing need were and are being tracked to understand the full impact of the special lettings plan. The special lettings plan was published and posted on the PCC website for 3 weeks, and that was prior to the allocations commencing in April of 22. Ward members and housing portfolio member were briefed on the 25th of March. The aims of the special lettings plan were to maximise the number of moves made possible for people with a housing need registered on the Portsmouth Housing Register, to assist as many existing social housing tenants as possible to be rehoused into accommodation suitable for their needs, to assist existing social housing tenants who were under-occupying their current properties to move into the right size home, positively impacting their financial circumstances and freeing up their home for a new right-sized household, to assist social housing tenants currently living in overcrowded households, positively impacting on their health and well-being while freeing up their property for another household, to build a sustainable community at Doyle Avenue, enabling local residents to maintain their connections to the local area, and to redress the imbalance of numbers of lettings to transfer households as opposed to applicant households on the housing register. All moves and subsequent resolutions of the housing move were tracked. In reviewing the impact of the special lettings plan, we've reviewed the previous housing circumstances of all those allocated and are understanding also the property released and how that's utilised. And that helps us to provide an insight into the positive impact of the special lettings plan. I've then included some case studies of families that were allocated the properties, and these are families who have gone into the 3-bed general needs properties. So family number 1 was exceptionally banded, and they no longer needed their 4-bed accessible home and wanted to downsize. The move enabled another family registered for a 4-bed accessible home to be rehoused at their current home, and they could not, unfortunately, adapt the property that they were living in at the time. Family 2 were low banded and had lived in their overcrowded 2-bedroom home for over 5 years. And they had tried to find alternative accommodation via an exchange during that time, but had been unsuccessful, and their move then created an opportunity for a homeless family to be rehoused into their previous PCC property. Family 3 was low banded again and had been overcrowded for over 5 years in their 2-bedroom flat, and their move to Mycroft Terrace enabled another tenant to downsize from her 3-bed social housing property to a 2-bed. And family 4 was low banded and overcrowded for over 4 years in a 2-bed flat, and they had been trying to exchange during that time across all our estate areas, but had been unsuccessful, and their previous property enabled the housing of a homeless family who were able to leave PCC temporary accommodation where they'd lived for several months. Housing stock released. It was expected when we started the lettings arrangement that initially it would deliver 13 properties within the existing PCC stock. That was reduced to 11 as a decision to reconsider the transfer-only policy was made, as it allowed, within the plan, for us to look at circumstances of other families, and we reviewed 2 homeless families and reversed to the standard allocation policy to allow those 2 families to be housed, 1 to leave supported housing and 1 to leave homelessness accommodation. So to summarise, the evidence showed that the use of the special lettings plan for allocation of the new development has allowed the creation of a balanced and sustainable community whilst directly responding to housing pressures. And the lettings work and the impact of the special lettings plan will continue to be monitored as part of our post-occupancy work, and that work will cover the next 12-month period from June when the properties were let. The purpose of post-occupancy work is to understand directly the family's perspective and how the new development meets both their housing need and also how their lifestyle is impacted by living in the right property, and how that property's build, fixtures, fittings and services help them. And then learning from the post-occupancy evaluation will also continue with the special lettings plans being considered for new developments in the future.
Thank you for that, Joe. Before I come to the residents' concern, the reason I asked for this to be put on is firstly to let people know it's happened. Because we didn't have to do that, but I think it's in the interest of openness and transparency, it's important. And secondly, also to see if there are any lessons that we can learn for future lettings going forwards. Because I think that's always quite useful, because certainly I think we all get complaints about people not being able to move. Maria.
Just one sort of comment, Joe, through the chair. The case studies that you presented, on paper they seem very clear, very straightforward, but how was it done in reality?
Do you mean how did we select those people? So what we did was we actually used the housing register as a basis of data, and Ben, who's our data analyst, went through and pulled off of the allocation list everybody that would be eligible for that property, and then what we looked at was the resulting chain of properties that would create from that person being housed. So instead of, for example, taking the two people that I referenced that were in temporary accommodation that were able to move, it was about housing them into properties that people left rather than actually making them the first allocation. And so by creating the chain of properties and actually looking at what the chain would be, that's how we selected those families.
Just another quick one. If people weren't actually expecting to move, was there any form of financial help with the actual move?
I think everybody who's registered for a property is looking for that move, and we didn't have anyone raise with us any issues. With new builds, there are additional costs that you wouldn't otherwise have with a property, so they might never have had curtain tracks, they might never have had certain fixtures and fittings in the property, and we do have a service at the beginning of those lettings that helps with that. Also, as you move in, there's usually snagging going on with the properties. There are people in there all the time. We did have some waste collection additional work that we did to help people, because they'd never, I think, lived in houses before. They were used to having communal bins and things like that, so we did some work there. But in general terms, Maria, we didn't have anyone raise an issue with actually being able to move, and they were overcrowded, so they were expecting and wanting to move.
Thanks, Maria. Sue? Hello? Did you have anything? If you didn't, that's absolutely fine. That's okay. We'll come back to you in a second. Hello, you. Any questions or comments at all?
No, I think it sounds brilliant.
Well, thank you. That was comment enough. That was all right. Now, have we given enough time for Sue to actually remember what she was going to say? If not, you'll come back to you a bit later, my love.
Sorry, Councillor Sanders, I was so busy thinking about my own problem with moving that I can't take anything else in at the moment.
Okay, well, I think that may be a separate conversation to have with people after the meeting, but thank you very much for putting that forward. That's very kind of you. Right, George.
Thank you. For some reason, every time you look at me with that smile, it puts me on edge. It's very
there are other smiles available, I have to say.
Fantastic. Let's not see them. Yeah, obviously anything where we're assisting people that are in overcrowded accommodation and putting them in accommodation which is more suitable for themselves is fantastic. The only thing I've really got a wondering question is like in 3.3.3, it says that housing tenants who are under-occupying their current properties moving to the right-size home positively impacting their financial circumstances, blah, 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 blah. Are these people that are moving people that have willingly asked to downsize, or is this one of the processes where we as a council say you must downsize and we're removing you from your home? So is it more of a, which method?
So we don't do that. We talk to people about living in the appropriate home, and we talk to people about their financial circumstances, which can be negatively impacted when they've got an under-occupancy situation. So we don't force people out of their homes, but these people have all registered with us on the housing register, stating that they're under-occupying and asking us to find them a right-sized home. So all of them were asking for and looking for a move, and one of the main reasons that they were asking and looking for a move was to help with their financial circumstances, other than the first family.
That's fair enough. That's all I've got to say about in regards to Doyle Avenue, but you know, there has been times in the past where residents are essentially forced to move out of their house. That does happen within our local authority. And it's not something I'm very comfortable with, although I understand we need to free up homes which are more suitably sized. But we do certainly push and encourage people in a more negative way to leave homes they've been in for a long time, so that does happen. But either way, putting people from overcrowding into more suitable accommodation for themselves is great, and I know that we've got a huge need for that across the city wide. I know a lot of residents, especially in Paulsgrove, where they've got 8 people in a 3-bedroom house or 6 people in a 2-bedroom house, so any way we can get them out of those and put them into more suitable accommodation is fantastic. Thanks.
Thanks, George. And if you've got any specific instances where people have felt forced to move, please feel free to raise that with the team. That's very kind. Cal, thank you.
Thank you, Darren. Just to pick up on, I guess, George's question as well, and to provide maybe a more political response that might be useful for the discussion. I think there are people who feel that they are coerced or forced to move from properties that they're under occupying, and that's because of the bedroom tax introduced in 2012 by the coalition government. So there are lots of people who are effectively having their benefits cut as a result of having an extra bedroom where maybe a previous family member has moved out. Now, I think obviously we all want people to live in properties that are suitable for their circumstances, and if there is, say, someone living on their own in a 3-bed house that could otherwise be housing a family, I think there is an argument for encouraging them and having that conversation, as has been said. But yeah, I do kind of object to any use of kind of coercion or kind of strong encouragement through things like the bedroom tax. I think that was the wrong way to go about it. I think we need to encourage and incentivise people to want to move by providing alternative properties which meet their needs and are places that they want to live. So with that out the way, my kind of general points on this are that I'm generally in favour of these types of special allocations policies. I think that overcrowding within our existing council housing stock is a massive issue. Every time I go out door knocking or every time I'm engaging with residents, more often than not, household overcrowding is the #1 issue in Charles Dickens wards, and I'm sure it's the same in lots of other areas where there's significant amount of social housing. In the 2011 census, 23% of households in Charles Dickens ward, so almost 1 in 4, were listed as overcrowded. I suspect that is a massive underestimate because there will be lots of people who perhaps aren't officially living places or are kind of transient for various reasons. So we know there are lots of people who are living in properties that are too small for the size of their household, and anything we can do to try and facilitate moves which open up properties and ensure that people are living in places where there's the appropriate space for them to live safely and kind of give space for kids to develop, etc., is a good thing. Just a few specific, fairly detailed points I'll mention briefly. In terms of the publication, I know I've discussed this before, but I'll mention just for the public records. I believe the way the wording in the report is laid out is that it suggests that there was an opportunity for residents or perhaps members of the public to be consulted or to feedback on the policy. 3.21 and again 3.21 kind of refers to this by talking about the special lettings plan being posted on the Portsmouth City Council website, and during that period that was up there being no responses relating to the arrangement. However, in practice, as I understand, no one was actually told it was on the website. There may well have been a link that existed, but that link was not circulated or promoted in any way. So I do think it's a little bit misleading to suggest that people were given the opportunity to feedback and didn't, when in fact no one knew it was there. It's a fairly minor report in the grand scheme of things, and even more of a kind of minor issue because I generally agree with the policy. However, I think as a point of principle it's worth mentioning because I wouldn't want that to be replicated in future where perhaps it's something more controversial or something that people may well have wanted to input onto but weren't given the opportunity to. And I think we shouldn't be doing things that are just box ticking exercises to say yes we put it on the website but we didn't tell people about it. First point. The second point around the allocation, so I still remain quite surprised, and I'm not saying it's wrong, but I just think it's worth noting that the 3-bed houses which were built, brand new 3-bed houses with gardens, all went to households in the low band. Now I understand the rationale for that and understand how it's been explained in the report and how it's been explained offline, but I still find it surprising. Again, I'm not saying it's wrong, but there are kind of hundreds of households with a 3-bed need in the high band and the medium bands. many of which will be existing tenants, so would have been eligible under this policy. And I still don't understand the exact process by which it ended up going to people in the low bands. I've had the explanation, and I'm not saying it's wrong, I just think it's worth noting. Last point, I guess, / question, is that I think, as I've noted, there is significant need within our existing housing stock for people to move in order to get extra space for them and their families. Lots of people are overcrowded, and lots of people are going to be overcrowded for significant periods of time under the existing standard allocations policy. So I guess my question is there any potential to mainstream some of the learning with regards to the knock-on impacts of prioritising transfers within the standard allocations policy?
Thank you for that, Cal. A few of those were my own points as well, so you just beat me to it. Joe, do you have any sort of responses to those three questions? I'm not the political point about the bedroom tax. I might want to deal with that in a second, but the points about the more specific points.
I think the question about whether or not there's learning that we can take for our allocations policy, we're just working on our strategy for homelessness and rough sleeping and bringing those together. And at the point that we take people through that consultation and we learn what people think about our strategy, that will be the point for us to bring together the learning from the consultation, the learning from operational practice, and the learning from things like the special lettings policy to review our housing allocation policy at that time and to make sure that it's fit for purpose alongside our new strategy.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you for that. My comments, I think the first thing about the learning environment is important. Since I resumed this role in 2018, the key thing has always been to say to the team, look, learn from everything, understand everything, never believe everything's going to go right all the time, but always learn and always look at it. And I think it's important in this particular case, because I think now we're at the right stage where we can actually look at the impact a different approach to our lettings plan can have for the city as a whole, which is the mainstreaming point you made, Cal, and I was going to make, essentially. In 2018, there was no plan to build council houses in the city. We had bought about 10 back in a year, and that was less than the number that were being sold through Right to Buy. Over the past 4 years, we have reversed that. We now have a programme of building about 700 new homes, which is great news. We've bought back more than 300. That's 1,000 new council homes either bought in train or will happen. There will be more, but we want to make sure we're fully aware of that before making that public. And so I think now we can look at the lettings policy, because I think all 42 of us councillors would move everybody who comes to us. I know I would, frankly, but we can't, partly because there ain't the places, and partly also because I think people want to move to particular parts of the city, which is perfectly understandable. Everybody seems to want to move to my ward, in Baffins and Milton and Southsea, which is great. But there are other parts of the city where people don't want to move. I find that mad and wrong, but that's their freedom and that's their choice. And choice is quite important here, because it is the choices that George said earlier on, which is, what are the pressures that people face? If there's spare places where people don't want to go, then they will feel forced, rightly or wrongly, forced to go there, because that's where the places are, or wait on that waiting list for years. So I think the joy of this is actually to have an open and one of the reasons I brought it here today, Cal, was to have an open conversation about the choices that we face and about the changes that we can make, so that we can actually have an allocations policy that suits people's needs. It's not purely overcrowding. There's also many people in properties that are too big for them. But that's where their hopes and their dreams and their families and their life has been. And it's incredibly difficult to say to them, look, you really need to move somewhere smaller, because as George has said earlier, they'll feel forced to do that. And should you do that in a free society, to people whose life has been there, whose memories have been there, whose valuables have been there, that's really difficult. I think you're right also to raise government policies that are put forwards. With regards to the bedroom tax and the coalition, I felt a bit like an old left Labour activist under New Labour, frankly, looking at things that I didn't necessarily like. But it was there. We got more people out of it when it was brought in. But you're right, that sort of policy stuff, particularly things like the local housing allowance not being at the 30th percentile, for instance. Those sorts of policy interventions do harm people, and we have to look at those. But I'm pleased we're here. I definitely want to see some learning, Joe, from this, not least in, at minimum, all future developments that we're doing. And I would like to see the allocation strategy and see where we can go so that we can actually help people who all come to the elected arm and go, can we move, please? So that's really great. Thank you very much, and thank you very much for all your comments. That's really, really helpful. So thank you for that. And thank you very much, Residents Consortium, and Sue, we'll talk to you later. Hello. Carol wants to go in 22 minutes, so...
Sorry, I'll be quick, I promise. So what was I going to say? I've forgotten now.
You've forgotten.
No,
it'll come back to you.
Like for like. So, so Sue's having a problem at the moment with moving. She's got a 2-bed, and everything that they're showing us either a lot smaller. Obviously, she's going to be downsizing, so it's going to be smaller. But the space, how can you justify or maintain a same kind of space? Because I know that the new builds are a lot smaller than the older buildings. So is there a way to help around that? Because I know when you're on a list, if you refuse a place, that's it, you're back on the list. You've got to go through all that again. So is there a way around that, or does that make sense?
Joe, do you want to answer that? I realise it's an extra question, but and we'll talk. Well, if it's okay, people may have a chat with specific circumstances outside this meeting, because we don't want to reduce it to people's individual circumstances, who will be here all night. So, Joe?
I'd be really happy to take you through it, and also the size of our new build properties and why they are what they are, and to talk about the specific circumstances. I'll just hang on at the end and we can cover it all. Thank you.
I would say, though, that in the private renting sector, I am getting regarded as the spawn of Satan, because they regard our space standards as too big. So, you know, I don't want pokey holes. But thank you very much for that. Right. Moving on, the smoke and carbon monoxide alarm amendment regulations. We do not have Mered this morning, but we have Steve. Do you want to talk us through that?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Sanders. As you indicated, this is a report which is about smoke and carbon monoxide alarms update. So the purpose of this report is to set out our response an approach to meet the new requirements to the amended regulations in 2022 for those regulations. So the background to it is there already was a smoke and carbon monoxide alarm regulations in 2015, and that was a statutory requirement for private landlords to provide smoke and carbon monoxide alarms in their properties. In light of the Grenfell tragedy and reviews on building safety, there was consultation to extend that requirement to social housing. And as a consequence, the regulations have been updated to the smoke and carbon monoxide alarm amendment regulations 2022, and there is now a new requirement for social housing to provide smoke and carbon monoxide alarms in their social properties from 1st of October 2022. The actual detail of the requirements is for all properties to have at least one smoke alarm equipped on each storey of their home, and also to provide a carbon monoxide alarm in any room that has a fixed combustion appliance. In terms of smoke alarms, the City Council took that decision over 10 years ago to install hardwired smoke alarms in all of its properties. And so really this regulation really confirms good practice that the City Council has already been undertaking. And those smoke alarms are serviced every year, annually, as part of the gas servicing contract. They're checked, and if there are any faults or if the smoke alarm has expired in accordance with the manufacturer's dates on the alarms, then those alarms are replaced. And we monitor that regularly through our compliance checks. With regard to carbon monoxide alarms, the regulations were amended in June this year. and became effective from the 1st of October 2022, so it's essentially tomorrow. And we're already using all of our opportunities to install the carbon monoxide alarms in our properties and really utilising existing visits that we're already doing. So the key area is that obviously we have to do gas servicing every year in every property that has a gas appliance. So we are taking the opportunity when we do those gas servicing visits to install a carbon monoxide alarm. And then we're also taking opportunities whenever we're doing any of our electrical inspections and looking at other trades that when they're already doing their visit we can then install an alarm and again utilise every visit. Currently in the report it talked about 32% of our properties have smoke alarms and as of today I checked the stock data this morning and we're up to 35%, so that is, just shows that we are monitoring that fairly regularly to make sure that we do meet that aim. And then the additional area that we're looking at is that we've already planned to put an article in House Talk in the autumn edition that will explain to our residents and inform them of the requirement and also give them advice about how they can make contact with us so that we can then also make an appointment to install the alarm so that we can really try to speed up the installation as quickly as possible. In terms of the costs, we estimate that the cost is going to be between £500,000 and £700,000, but we are still working through that. And the funding for the installation of the alarms will be from our capital reserves. It is already been allowed for in our programme, or it's not been allowed for. It's an in-year pressure. In terms of monitoring, we will continue to monitor that, and obviously we report that through the governance and audits quarterly reporting. And so, really, in conclusion, the recommendation of the paper that is information only is really to Cabinet to note the actions of the report, the progress made to date, and the future plans for delivery to comply with the new regulations. Thank you, Councillor.
Thanks very much for that, Steve. Again, the reason I brought this report is to put these things into the public domain. Tenant safety and leaseholder safety should be our number one priority as a landlord. There's not always been political consensus around that, but there should be. And I think it's important that we have as much openness as possible as we can on these things. Residents Consortium Humans. Sue, you're looking active.
Sorry. Last year, I think, where I live in the courts, they took all our gas meters out and put them in a cupboard out on the balcony where our boilers are. So they still need to have a carbon monoxide. I thought the whole idea of that was so there was no carbon monoxide fumes or anything. But my daughter has had her yearly gas check and they've put one out in the cupboard with the boiler.
Yeah, so the reg is wherever there's a boiler, essentially.
Oh, right.
We would need to. So again, it's not to where it concern residents. They are safe appliances. They are serviced once a year. This is just an additional safety measure to make sure that that they are safe. You know, that it's very rare. I should hasten to say.
It's just that the chappie, when my daughter said to him, "Why?"
Yeah.
And he said, "I don't know. We've just been told to put them in."
Yeah. It's wherever there's a gas appliance. So it doesn't apply for a cooker, but essentially most boilers are in the kitchens or in adjacent rooms, and it's wherever there's a flue, basically. And it's just an additional protection, really, to a resident. That's all it is.
Lovely. Thank you.
Sue, does that satisfy your questions? Hello. Any other comments on this one? You can say no. Don't worry. It's all right. Hello, Maria.
Hello. I'm really pleased about this report. It's good to know that the council is actually doing something about the carbon monoxide. I've recently had my gas servicing done, and the gentleman that came did put one up in my kitchen for me. How certain can you be, though, that the private landlords are obeying this thing to put them in? Because there are so many private landlords out there that aren't already doing what they should be doing, not even having smoke alarms, I believe, some of them, let alone carbon monoxide.
Thank you, Maria. So this report focuses on council housing, social housing, and the regulations are asking social housing landlords to do something that is already in place for the private sector housing as we understand it. It's a question really for our private sector housing team, who have a part to play in ensuring that landlords are complying with the regulations. But to be clear, this is a regulation that was already in place for private sector housing landlords. I can't tell you in all honesty where they're at with compliance on that. And as you can see from this report, although the regulation comes in from the 1st of October, I think it's worth stressing that through Meredith and Steve's good stewardship of our repairs and maintenance service, we find ourselves in a position where we've got a third of carbon monoxide already installed, and a really good plan to complete that by the end of the year. So sorry, I can't specifically answer your question, but I'm happy to take that away and come back.
I think that would be good, James. Thank you. Maria, we recently did a survey. We commissioned a survey as an administration about HMOs in the city. And we found that about 32% of HMOs are what are called Category 1 hazards, which is the really bad stuff for those people who don't do that sort of thing. And that compared with 12% in other private rented properties. So there's a massive difference. I think one of the things, again, we want to do is to try and make sure every home is as safe as we can. There are different rules, there are different regulations, but you may see more work on that later on this year. Is that all right, Maria? That's lovely. Now, as Cal's got 10 minutes, feel free, sir.
Thank you, Darren. Yeah, I mean, in general, I haven't got too much to say on this other than to support it. I think it's interesting to note that for a period of time, social housing has been regulated to a lesser standard than private housing has in relation to the requirement for smoke and carbon monoxide alarms. So it's good to see that social housing is now being brought up to those same standards. I'm not quite sure why it was lagging behind in the first place, but I guess that's another question of government policy. Just to note, I guess, the impressive progress that's been made towards implementation over a relatively short period, and clearly a lot of work goes into that behind the scenes in terms of getting processes in place and then ensuring that contractors are going out and doing the work, as we've noted has already been happening, and as at my flat as well recently. So glad to report that everything is going to plan. So yeah, happy to support the report and kind of thank everyone that's been involved in it. Just a last point, in quick response to Maria, I thought it was an interesting question, and actually, I mean, this is one of the reasons why we have been pushing quite strongly for landlord licensing schemes for private sector housing in Portsmouth, because at the moment, most privately rented homes, there may be, like you say, a legal requirement for there to be a smoke alarm and a carbon dioxide alarm, but the council has no awareness, no intelligence about whether that is being put in place or not. And one of the big positives of a landlord licensing scheme, were it to be implemented across the city, is that those kind of requirements could be kind of proactively checked and regulated by the private sector housing team. So another argument in favour of landlord licensing there, I might suggest.
Thank you for that, Cal. If you want to go, feel free. You don't have to if you don't want to, but if you want to go, feel free. George?
Thank you, Darren. Yeah, obviously it's a positive thing. Firstly, I want to thank Steve for taking time out the other day with Meredith to answer a serious amount of questions for me that I had. Obviously, being new to housing this year, I had a list as long as my arm of questions about how the portfolio works in respect of doing things like this, you know, as in our subcontractors visiting properties, doing gas safety checks and things like that. And the team gave me an incredibly detailed report, which I was very satisfied with. So thank you for that, Steve. In regards to the costings, bearing in mind, as I say, this has been a thing from the Level and Up department, it seems. I'm assuming, and I know the answer is going to be no, I'm assuming there is absolutely no form of government grants or funding to support us with this, bearing in mind it wasn't an expected cost.
Yes, you're correct. There's no grant funding or government funding for this work.
Which is a real shame, isn't it? Because, you know, they've chucked it on councils, I guess, across the nation who are already stretched financially, and this is no cheap cost, £500,000 to £700,000 not to get any support, but given timescales to do it is disappointing. But hey, that's what we come to expect. In regards to the time implications with the legislation coming in tomorrow, did you say? Do we have any duty of care or legal or statutory duty to ensure that it's completed by a certain time? And if we don't, do we get any fine with penalties or anything like that, or what's the process in regards to that?
There are penalties linked to the regulation if you don't comply, but obviously I would that they would take into account when it's come in and what progress you're actually making. So that our aim is to try and get everywhere 100% compliant as quickly as we can, and we're taking every opportunity we can to, whenever we visit a property with a contractor, to install the alarm so we can get that as quickly as possible.
Amazing. So there's no definitive time date stamp. It's more of there is a human element to this where you can go back to people and say this isn't, so there's, okay, cool. Thank you. There's no further questions.
No worries, George. Thank you very much, and thank you for the comments of everybody. I think, I firstly agree with Cal to a very large extent. I think Conservative, Labour and coalition governments since 1979 have all seemed to be obsessed with deregulation in one way, shape or form. Hopefully that will change, but not under this government, I think. And I think that's a real concern for us. And I think it was the horror of Grenfell that woke a lot of people up to some of the interesting, I don't want to get sued, practices that had gone on. So I do think this is welcome, but I think George's point is absolutely right. In local government, there's something called a new burden, and that normally gets government money. This, to me, is a new burden, but doesn't have government money. So therefore, it is coming out of people's rents, basically. I think it's right. I think it's right because I think people want to live in a safe home, but I would certainly welcome all government grants, and I think one of the interesting things about this is how much of this, all these sorts of housing regulations are going to be rolled back under the Truss administration and the Truss government, and we shall see that as we go forwards. But no, thank you very much for all that, and thank you all for your comments. It is now 10:45, the bells have arrived on time, so if that's okay, colleagues, I will close this meeting. Thank you very much.